So today we're going to be talking about social change and the movement from a traditional society to a postmodern society. This is all found in chapter 24 of your text. So when we're talking about social change, we have to talk about the way in which social change occurs, the types of social change we see, and what really all of that involves. So social change we see is constant throughout the world. Sometimes social change is intentional, while other times it's unplanned. Social change normally involves controversy. It tends to be controversial. We also note that some social change matters more than other change. For instance, the difference between fashion styles and political movements. One has more significance than the other generally. So what are the different types of social change? Generally, we see social change occur when there's conflict. We also see social change occur when there's new ideas that are developed in a society. And finally, we see social change occur when there are demographic changes. Demographic changes may occur when you see different populations develop. You may also see this when there is an increase in the amount of population in a society. Social change is partially reliant upon the idea of invention, discovery, and diffusion. Invention, of course, is taking already existing items in a society and transforming them into something new. Discovery is finding those items in the first place, and diffusion would be taking what is the norm in your society and applying it to other cultures, moving into other cultures with that new technology or those new businesses, etc. When we talk about modernization, we talk about the dimensions of modernization developed by Berger in 1977. Modernity really starts in the scientific revolution, but for the purposes of sociological ideas, we start talking about the modernization as it occurred during the early to mid-1800s. Modernization occurs when there's a decline of small traditional communities, when there's also an expansion of personal choice as well as individualism. We also see in modern structures an increase in social diversity. And the orientation of modern society is towards the future. There becomes a growing awareness of time. Time is extremely important in those societies. So what do theorists say regarding modernization? All of these theories should be familiar to you because we've discussed them in the past. First, you have Ferdinand Tönnies, and what he says is the loss of community within a modern society. Gemeinschaft, he explains, is the social solidarity found in pre-industrial early societies, whereas Gesellschaft is the lack of social solidarity that's found in post-industrial societies. Emil Durkheim focuses on the division of labor. He looks at what he calls mechanical solidarity and organic solidarity. He suggests that in both pre-industrial and post-industrial societies, you have solidarity. In societies that are structured around organic solidarity, there becomes mechanisms, or there is the initiation of mechanisms, to cope with the fact that we've lost a traditional sense of solidarity and kinship. His focus, therefore, on the types of solidarity rests on, at least in the post-industrial world, rests upon the idea of the division of labor. So what are mechanical solidarity societies? Mechanical solidarity rests in those pre-industrial societies where the division of labor is very minor. Organic solidarity is in those post-industrial societies where, of course, the division of labor is going to be major. You're going to have a lot of new groups involved in the division of labor as well. Then we come to Max Weber and his idea of the rationalization of bureaucracy. Now, Max Weber said that there's a long-term historical process that would transform or is responsible for transforming the modern world. So you have the practical rationalization method. This is, of course, going to focus on that which is pragmatic. The theoretical, which is going to focus upon the abstract. Substantive rationality is where individuals might consider a range of possible values or actions and attempt to make them consistent. Weber termed this type of rationality and considered it problematic in modern society, in that rationalization of social life makes it difficult for people to pursue particular values. For example, pursuit of family or religious values may be difficult in modern society given economic pressures and the dominance of bureaucratic organizations. Formal rationality is a broader form of rationality that characterizes organizations, especially bureaucratic ones. This leads to what he calls universally applied rules, laws, and regulations that characterize formal rationality in the West, particularly in the economic, legal, and scientific institutions, as well as in the bureaucratic form of domination. Rational legal forms of authority, such as the contemporary legal and judicial systems, are examples of formal rationality. Weber's fear was that formal rationality was becoming more dominant in modern and Western culture or society, with substantive rationality declining in importance. Weber notes that formal rationality developed as capitalistic forms of organizations emerged, and its expansion is associated with the development of formal organizations and methods. This formal rationality and the organizational features associated with them tend to crowd out other forms of rationality and limit the possibilities of creative social action. This was a large concern for Weber. Much larger of a concern for Karl Marx. Karl Marx developed the idea of socialism, focused his ideas regarding modern society on capitalism. He suggested that what you had in a feudalistic society transfers over within the confines of an industrial society in the form of capitalism. In other words, we change the verbiage, but it's all the same. In a feudalistic society, you had the serfs and the peasants on the bottom. You sometimes had that pseudo-middle manager in the middle. And you had, of course, the lords, the people who own the land. He suggested that in modernity, in an industrial structure, you would have the development of capitalism where you had the peasants, or as he called them, the proletariat, on the bottom. You would sometimes have the development of the middle manager. In the factories, this was the person who would beat down the poor peasants. And you would have the capitalist, the owner, the bourgeois, the person who in the past served the role as lord. The same people who were peasants in the past would have children currently living, at least when Marx wrote, who would represent the proletariat. Those who were lords in the past would have children, and those children would work as the factory owners. He suggested there was no change in systems, just the labels. He also focused in modernity on the fetishism of commodities. He suggested the new form of feudalism in a capitalistic society, because of industrialization, would take root in what he called the fetishism of commodities. In other words, we would want to have things so badly, so much, that it would become a cycle. Our labor would become worthless. So theories regarding modernization, let's look at each one. First, the structural functionalist theory. They suggest that modernity is a mass society. Prosperity and bureaucracy is strengthened while social bonds become weakened. They're focused on the ever-expanding state. The state becomes of more importance than the individuals. They suggest that this starts to increase during the early part of the 1900s. Then you have the social conflict perspective. They suggest that modernity is a class society with pronounced stratification. The focus of this school, of course, is on the different types of social stratification that exist in a contemporary society that may not have existed in the past, such as ideas about race, gender, age, etc. The symbolic interactionist perspective's focus is on the individual. They suggest that mass society is socially diverse and rapidly changing, and so we focus on the isolation of people, the powerlessness of the individual as it is a social reality. And we're going to talk about what's called a social character, which is in the next section of this discussion. That's all related to the symbolic interactionist perspective. Then we come to the postmodern perspective. The focus of this is on modernity and progress. So this school of thought is going to focus on modernity and progress. They're looking at the global the way in which modern societies vary globally. Social character, what is it? This is the pattern of personality common to members of a particular society. What does that mean? Well, the symbolic interactionist perspective in sociology focuses on the fact that, sure, you have different types of personality, but oftentimes in a society that, especially in a modern society, you will have the development of what we call social character. This is where we see personality being very similar amongst members. For instance, people in the US tend to be extroverted and individualistic. In fact, the individualism runs so deep that it's difficult to think in terms of the social group. What are examples of social character according to the school of thought? You have what's called traditional directedness and other directedness. Tradition directedness is rigid conformity to time-honored ways of living, whereas other directedness is openness to the latest trends and fashions and is a way of imitating others. These are extreme forms of social character that vary from society to society. Now we come to postmodernity itself. What are the social problems linked to postmodernity? Is postmodernity a good place to be? Are we going to move forward from here? Sociologists suggest that in important respects, modernity has failed. Social changes demonstrate continued systems of social stratification, showing the bright light of progress is fading. In other words, most theorists focused on the fact that postmodernity would bring in new forms of equality, less social stratification, new ways that science and technology would lead us to a better place in society. We see that science no longer holds the answers. We've moved past that to almost a post-scientific, pseudo-technological culture. We see that cultural debates tend to continue to intensify. Cultural debates between groups and among groups are both intensifying in various societies. And we also suggest that social institutions are changing. In order to have progress, you have to have these social institutions change, but that change is oftentimes difficult for populations of people. In reality, we'll never know enough about the social change we've gone through in the last thousands of years. Traditional societies, we like to think we understand them all, but we don't, and we only have what's left behind from other groups. We know from the sociological perspective that some groups may not want the future to know about its specific ideas, so they may not pass those along. It's difficult to study sociology with that respect in mind, or with that aspect in mind. Thank you so much.